It should come as no surprise that I have a thing for movies. However, it might come as a surprise to some that I also have a thing for singing. But chances are that's not going to be much of a surprise either, especially for those of you who've seen those song covers I used to make with Blogan, and sometimes solo. So with that in mind, it should definitely come as no surprise that I have a thing for musicals. They're like a match made in heaven, combining two elements I admire, a story with the potential to be a movie, merged with songs that can blend well with said story. As a guy who grew up on musicals, both on stage and as movies, I found a handful that I still remember to this day, ranging from some I found okay, to some I downright loved to pieces. So because of that, I'm feeling the urge to share my top 10 favorite musical movies. The only rule I'm addressing this time is that these movies have to be actual movies, filmed on a set or in a studio. If it was just on stage, I'm not counting it, no matter how much I may enjoy it. But fear not, I'm not planning to leave those musicals in the dust. I am considering making a separate video for onstage musicals somewhere down the line, so now, let's hit it. Newsies. This movie represents the newsboys' strike of 1899. After the price of newspapers rose, the newsboys started protesting. Although I couldn't imagine the real protest was this full of energy or fun to watch. So during the Newsies protest and fight between the rival newspaper team, we're given some enjoyable songs, with some satisfying choreography. Though I admit the strong New York stereotypical accents can get a little annoying at times, but it's not too much of an issue, as the characters are entertaining on their own. And can you imagine the Newsies leader is Christian Bale? New York may be a pretty common setting for some musicals, but out of those musicals, this is the best of the bunch that I've seen.
Just singing in the rain.
Singing in the Rain. How could I not put this on the list? This movie's a classic! First of all, they got Gene Kelly. I've always been a fan of his work, after seeing that Tom and Jerry short. Kelly's acting alongside Donald O'Connor and Debbie Reynolds, Carrie Fisher's mother. Even those who've never seen the movie would be familiar with some of the songs, whether it's Make Them Laugh or Good Morning. The story is that a studio is starting to enter the newest advent, as the producers decide to stray away from silent movies, and so they decide that one of their first fully audible movies would end up being a musical. Ironic, is it not? During this time, Lockwood meets Kathy, and they end up forming a relationship. However, Lockwood's original partner, Lena, becomes envious and very manipulative, making production harder on everyone around her. As I've stated before, the songs are very well known and rather catchy. And what would a Gene Kelly movie be without some fascinating choreography? Those scenes are fun to watch, and the characters know how to use the scenery to their advantage. This movie might not be for everyone, but it's definitely worth a watch if you're in the mood for a good old-fashioned flick, filled with singing and dancing. Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. Usually, I'm no fan of horror, and yet, I still had a good time watching this movie. The story has some similarities to The Count of Monte Cristo. The main character goes through severe accusations, but suffers the consequences anyway. Years later, he comes back under a new identity, seeking revenge. This movie was brought to us by Tim Burton, in case the dark atmosphere or Johnny Depp Helena Bonham Carter pairing didn't give it away. And those aren't the only big stars in this movie. There's also Alan Rickman, Timothy Spall, and Sacha Baron Cohen. Onto the horror element, Sweeney's working as a barber. However, instead of shaving his customers, he kills them with his razor, and leaves their bodies for his partner, Mrs. Lovett, to bake in the pies. The choices for actors, as predictable as they are still impressive. Especially Johnny Depp. I can't think of a better pick for Sweeney. Along with the grim environment, there are a major variety of songs. Some are catchy, some are emotional, and yet they're also memorable. If you're a Tim Burton fan, this is definitely a movie worth watching. Unless you're squeamish to this material, like I normally am, in which case, the live productions might be a safer watch, since they're not as detailed with the deaths as the movie. Les Miserables. We were given many renditions based off the Victor Hugh novel. There was a miniseries, a musical that got many stage showings, and multiple movies. But the one I'm referring to is the 2012 version. The only downside is that this version of the movie is one of the longer versions in comparison. But that doesn't matter too much to me, as the people at Universal knew how to make it worth the while. From the impressive scenery to the lovable characters, you've got your choice of Hugh Jackman, more Sacha Baron Cohen, more Helena Bonham Carter, and who could forget the extremely memeable, but still somewhat charming performance by Russell Crowe.
I am Sam.
And I'm Javert.
The soundtrack was far better than I was expecting. There were so many powerful renditions of the original songs, such as Look Down, Do You Hear the People Sing, and One Day More. Aside from those, some of these songs are also pretty fun to listen to, like with Master of the House. This classic French tale has been loved for years, and there's no doubt that it will continue being enjoyed in the many years to come. The Rocky Horror Picture Show. This is the most recent movie I've checked out, and boy have I been missing out! Now I see why so many people call this one of Tim Curry's most iconic performances. He was such a gem in this movie! Tim Curry plays Dr. Frankenfurter.
I'm just a sweet transvestite.
And he's enough to make the movie worth checking out. As for everything else, well, the story setup isn't too unique. You got this couple, Brad and Janet, who get lost in the woods. And so they end up spending the night in Dr. Frank's castle. It may not sound like much, and yet, the story gets so much better from there. The comedy in this movie ranges from goofy to rather mature. But it's not all comedy. There are a few unsettling scenes too, such as Eddie's body being hidden under the table, and Frank turning Brad and Janet into statues. But forget about that. What about the songs? Sometimes they may come up out of nowhere, but it's excusable since they're so damn catchy. I swear, I can't get enough of Time Warp. And that ending was such an out of nowhere twist. And considering how weird this movie can be, that's definitely saying something. Dr. Horrible's Sing-Along Blog. At first this choice was a little confusing for me, and I'm sure some other people are going to find it confusing too, since it's usually seen as a miniseries instead of a movie. In the end, I decided to put it on the list anyway. I couldn't help it. It's too charming. As simple and laid back as it may be, it still finds ways to be entertaining. This movie introduced me to some actors that I ended up becoming big fans of, such as Neil Patrick Harris and Nathan Fillion. Oh, and Howard's there too. The story is that Dr. Horrible's trying to make himself intimidating to society in order to get his recognition. And one way he decides to do that is to attempt to kill Captain Hammer. Now I'm starting to see why I was reminded of Megamind while I was watching this. Every song in the soundtrack is catchy and memorable, and even though a majority of the comedy is mostly cheesy humor, it still managed to make me laugh, and that's pretty rare. This movie's also pretty short too. It only goes on for about 40 minutes, so it won't take up too much time to watch. This is definitely worth checking out if you've never seen it before. The Wizard of Oz. This is definitely the oldest movie on the list, as it was released in theaters 81 years ago. One of the most astounding features in this movie is the visuals. Sure, some of the effects may be cheap, but then you got the details that really make this movie stand out. The well-crafted sets, the camera panning shots, all the unique character designs, especially the rare at the time anyway, color visuals. The way scenes go from black and white to colors everywhere is just so appealing. And then there's the main characters. These four are, without a doubt, one of the most iconic groups in cinematic history. Alongside Dorothy, she's with the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion. And who can forget the songs? Whether they're off to see the wizard or already at the merry old land of Oz. This is an enjoyable movie, teaching the classic moral, there's no place like home. Also, I'm convinced the lion was the first sign of furries becoming a thing. The Blues Brothers. Well, I've already ranted about the sequel. Now it's time to share the praises I have to the original. This movie delivers much more than offered. The story centers around the Blues Brothers, Jake and Elwood Blues, played by the late John Belushi and everyone's favorite vodka-selling Ghostbuster, Dan Aykroyd. They're trying to scrape up $5,000 to keep the orphanage from closing down, so they come up with a plan to reunite their band and earn the money via concert. Along their adventure, they run into some pretty big stars, such as James Brown, Cab Calloway, Aretha Franklin, Carrie Fisher, even Ray Charles. Oh, and there's some Pee Wee Herman too. But that's not all you'll find in this movie. There's toe-tapping musical numbers, great dancing, numerous car chases, charming characters, long-term comedy, short-term comedy, numerous car crashes, explosions, and an adventure full of shenanigans you'll remember for years. Unfortunately, the Blues Brothers get arrested at the end, but not before donating the money and completing their mission from God. So in the end, the viewers are left with hope that their efforts were enough to save the orphanage. Until the 2000 movie, when it's revealed that the orphanage got closed down anyway. Thanks, Landis. But even though the sequel sunk, that doesn't stop the first movie from being an ultimate must-see. Oliver. Based on the Charles Dickens classic, Oliver Twist comes with a remarkable classic.
Consider yourself.
Not only does the movie accurately display the book, but it makes the experience very entertaining. For those who never read the story, Oliver gets kicked out of an orphanage, and then ends up living under a new roof, which is a youth robbery training house, run by Fagin. The characters and their actors in this movie are very memorable. For example, Mark Lester, the guy who played Oliver, may not have had a lot of acting experience before this movie, but nonetheless, his performance was golden. But my favorite character in this movie is Fagin. He's a very charming and friendly fellow, and I just love Ron Moody's performance. He's so full of emotion and energy, and the makeup was really well done. They managed to make him look much older than he actually was. For the longest time, I couldn't believe he was only in his 40s. Ron Moody was the best Fagin I've seen. I even thought he was better at it than Rowan Atkinson. There are so many songs from the movie that I still love after all these years, such as Food Glorious Food, Be Back Soon, Who Will Buy, Oliver, Pick a Pocket, I Do Anything, Papa, even Reviewing the Situation. Although, there is one problem I have with the movie. Unfortunately, Bill Sykes, the villain, originally had a song, but it was never featured in the movie. And it was a pretty good song too. Aside from that, if you're looking for a musical that can illustrate ye olde England, but prefer to not sit through Sweeney Todd, then this movie might be a better choice. Whenever I find this movie on my shelf, I find myself tempted to pop it in. And now... Cats. Universal really knew what they were doing when they made this movie. This has got to be the most underrated gem I've ever seen. All the resources in this movie, be it technology, the sounds, or actors, have been put to excellent use. I'm so glad I saw this when I had the chance. I even took the time to... Hopefully everyone realized by now I was kidding. I mean, seriously, that movie was terrible. And now the real number one. Labyrinth. This movie was brought to us by two of the most creative minds at the time, Jim Henson and David Bowie. There's so much about this movie that screams Jim Henson, and good quality. From the creative scenery, to the interesting visual effects, to the goofy Muppet-esque side characters. And then, there's the Stardust star himself, Bowie. He plays the movie's villain, Jareth, the Goblin King. All these characters have some sort of charm to them. Even Sarah. I couldn't help but root for her, despite how annoying she can be at times. And her new friends who join her along the way, such as Ludo, Didymus, and Hoggle. Even Jareth. I know you're supposed to hate him, but being a big David Bowie fan myself, I couldn't help but smile when he was on screen. Whether he's intimidating the heroes, or just singing and dancing. And that's what really got me loving this movie. All these songs are amazing. Some are catchy, like Magic Dance or Underground. Some are goofy, like Chilly Down. And some are a little touching, like Within You or As the World Falls Down. Like I said before, Sarah was pretty unbearable in the beginning, but as the story progresses, she goes through character development as she's trying to save Toby. This movie was so entertaining from beginning to end. I would recommend this to just about anyone. There's no denying that the musical genre is one of my all-time favorites, and while I may find the process of seeing most of these go from story or stage theater to movie theater, or sometimes vice versa, fascinating, I still wouldn't say I'm a total sucker for all of them, as there were a few musicals that have let me down in the past. But there are some that still have great movie potential, like Hamilton. And no, I'm not counting the live Disney release, that was nothing more than a simple stage recording. I'm more than willing to give any upcoming musicals a shot, be it live or as a movie, as long as the concept isn't too ridiculous. Anyway, some of the older Nunnian viewers might have noticed this whole time, I did cover this before. In fact, it's pretty much the same video. But because the copyright system blows, the whole video got muted. So I had to make some changes to the outro and pray that this is more acceptable to YouTube standards. So I can only hope that this version turns out better. Well, take care all, and cue curtain.